The next part of the sweater is the neckband, and in order to knit the neckband right onto the sweater, we need to first finish the right shoulder seam. I'm demonstrating the back stitch seam here. You may use any you prefer. Up, 2 stitches away, and down 1 stitch back, working behind the bind-offs. So each stitch is actually going to get worked into twice. Well, I said each stitch. The space behind each stitch in the bind-off will get worked into twice. Make sure not to pull this overly tight. It gives good contact without doing so. And all the way across. There's the yarn marker. It's done its job. It can pull out. I fastened this yarn tail to this yarn tail, and now each can be woven in. I favor weaving them in separately, one at a time, just to avoid an extra bulky spot. That's enough, and we can snip right here. Right here is the open left shoulder area, and I'm just using the machine now as extra fingers. I'm going to come over to the area at the center front that we first bound off and hang behind each bound off stitch on 1 needle. Anywhere stitches were bound off, which is the center back neck and the center front neck, that is how I will determine how many needles to use for the neckband. The remaining area where there were decreases and vertical knitting, you may determine it by whatever number is given for the neckband stitches in a pattern. But a way that works equally well, sometimes even better, in my view, is what I am about to show you. Just to review, this is the front neck, and the back neck will be hung in the same manner. This area is decreases. This is the plain vertical knitting. And I recommend hanging it on a comfortable number of needles. When it's a large area, sometimes it helps to divide it into pieces like this. Hang the center, then hang the center of the new division, and keep on dividing it evenly. It is astonishingly good at getting an even neckband spacing. Make sure that you do not stretch. You may even want to ease a little, depending on whether your neckline was weighted when you were knitting it, because it might have stretched a little. And I prefer to go next to an entire column of stitches and pick up from that opening rather than a single strand of yarn. I think it makes a nicer job. Something you need to watch for is right here. I mustn't go into this opening again because it won't knit off neatly. And I've already used this opening. So this is the only one open to me, and that works fine. If there were not an opening, I should take this neckband off and start over. Well, take the garment off. The neckband is what we're setting up for. Because you need to have each needle enter a separate and distinct opening in the knitting. And that should make a nice neckband. I'll continue over here. But this time you need to count the number of stitches that you used apart from the center batch and use the same number to hang the congruent section of neckline so that it matches. So if this is on 18, this should be on 18. You may or may not need weights. It depends on your machine. This first row, I'm going to knit by hand to demonstrate how it's done. I'm fairly sure this machine would knit back from incorporating the edge that I've hung, but it might have trouble at the shoulder seam. And if it did, it would jam and I'd have to redo everything I just did. So whenever you think your machine might need a little help with a situation like that, you can manually knit the first row and save a lot of woe. And that's what I'm showing you here. If you're positive that your machine will knit it and be happy, that's fine. Here I'm knitting 8 rows in addition to the manually knitted row. And every time the carriage is at the right, in other words, every other row, I'm reducing the stitch size. So for my last 2 rows, I was down to the smallest size that this machine will knit, and it worked well. The exact increment is going to vary with your machine, and you're going to need to play around with it and determine what works best. My first 2 rows were stitch size 4, next 2 3, next 2 2, and finally 1. The neckband is an area where you can make a lot of style changes very easily. For example, we could just keep on knitting, knit it quite long, and make a turtleneck. Or you could simply knit a few more rows than I chose to knit for a tighter crew neck. Quite a few different collar styles can be achieved with minor variations here. For the neckband, I'm selecting knit 1, purl 1 ribbing. I am starting with the 3rd stitch rather than the 2nd to allow a stitch for seaming. And I'm dropping down all 8 rows that the machine knitted and catching the loop from the hand knitted row. So I latch 8 stitches back up, or 8 rows really, in that column of stitches, hang it back on the machine, skip the next stitch, drop, ladder down 8, and as you see, you can insert the tool into the stitch that you want to use as the base, give a sharp tug downward, and it ladders down lickety-split. You could vary the look of this sweater, in addition to the row count, by laddering down 2 consecutive columns. So you had purl 2, and then leaving 2 knits, and it would create what is, to my eyes, a sportier look of knit 2, purl 2 rib. The only difference between this and working the hem is that because we tightened the stitch size dramatically, the feel as you latch back up is different. And of course, there are fewer rows to do, so it goes fast. And then there is the position of the purl stitches. The purls, of course, are the ones that we're creating by laddering down and latching back up. And there are more of them in the collar because I did knit 1, purl 1. Generally, we do want the neckband to pull in snugly around the neck. Therefore, either knit 1, purl 1 or knit 2, purl 2 ribbing is often the first choice. Bind off with any bind off that you like. I use the transfer bind off. And make sure that you don't bind off so tightly that the head of the wearer will not fit through the neckline. And then the ribbing almost always looks better if you give it a lengthwise pull. We're done with the markers for the back neck position, so we can just remove them. And there's the neckline. Now go ahead and sew the left shoulder seam right through the neckband so we can move on to the sleeve.